On today's BioTalk, a GBAC TV production, I'm pleased to welcome two guests, Dr. Gavin McGregor-Skinner, the Senior Director of GBAC, along with Neal Wieselman, Director of Infection Prevention for Intercon Chemical. We are going to talk about an important topic. I would say we could call this getting to the truth about hand sanitizers and norovirus. If you're watching this program right now, there's an article to go with this that Neal wrote. The link to that article is in the video description below. But we're going to start with Gavin today. Where are we on infectious diseases, considering the winter season is fast approaching?
If we know that there are many infectious diseases that are seasonal, we also know, Jeff, that the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19 is still circulating. But we're coming into that fall, autumn, winter season where we usually see an increase in flu virus, respiratory syncytial virus, adenovirus, but even the norovirus, which we commonly see, can also spike around about this time. We've got a lot of holidays coming up. We've got a lot of parties coming up, and again, when we put people in a room, that's when we get those infectious diseases spread.
Neal, let's turn to you. Now, you wrote the article that we have in the ISSA site. The potentially controversial part of this is how some may have thought, maybe in the past, that alcohol-based hand sanitizers were effective against viruses, specifically norovirus. Can you give us some highlights about the article and why this is important to you?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to make sure people understand is that there's two different types of viruses, okay? Well, there's more than two, but two main types. You've got envelope viruses, which are the easier to kill viruses, which are more respiratory, like SARS, RSV, influenza, and things like that. They're easier to kill. The capsid layer around them is easier to penetrate. Then you've got your non-envelope viruses like norovirus or rhinovirus, and they have their what's called non-envelope, which means that they have a very tough capsid layer. Alcohol cannot penetrate it. So that's something that we've known for years. And there's always been, a distinction between the two viruses, especially in healthcare, but not everybody understands that. And that's where some of the confusion comes in, is the fact that the alcohol hand sanitizers do have the envelope viral efficacy, but they don't have non-enveloped. And so when people are pushing the alcohol-based products for COVID, for example, and that's when it really took off, is the CDC was recommending using it, but the FDA does not allow anyone that makes alcohol hand sanitizers to make any type of viral claims. So the few companies that did, that were actually just trying to be informative, because it did kill SARS, which caused the COVID, but of course doesn't kill norovirus. And they weren't saying that, but people weren't getting it because they think, oh, a virus is a virus. And so that's where some of the confusion came in. And so a couple of companies did get their hands slapped for just trying to be helpful, to say that, we do have SARS efficacy, but they weren't allowed to by the FDA. So that's where the confusion comes, is they're not allowed to clarify. And so on top of it, people started using alcohol-based hand sanitizers, of which ours was one of them at Intercom. We make alcohol hand sanitizers. I've been manufacturing them myself in one form or another for 35 years. And so then there's confusion between the CDC and the FDA, and between non-enveloped and enveloped, and norovirus and respiratory. And so the thing that everyone needs to understand is, while we're not allowed to say they have any viral efficacy, and I'm not saying that, but there's been testing that's been done that shows that it has SARS, COVID, efficacy, along with, RSV and influenza, but not the non-envelope, which is the norovirus. And most people don't know that. So they're just using it thinking they're protected against everything. And that's why we've been having norovirus outbreaks on a continuous basis, where it spikes between usually November and April is where you see the biggest spikes. It's year round. Because it's so highly contagious. some tiny little drop of norovirus has so many molecules in it that can infect so many people so fast that all it takes is one little drop and you have an outbreak. A lot of restaurants have found that out.
Yeah.
Same with a lot of health. I mean, it's the number one cause of healthcare acquired infections, HAIs. It's also the number one cause of foodborne outbreaks. And until we get the hand hygiene in place, that's going to stop it, because the other thing is the non-envelope norovirus, which is gastrointestinal. The others are more respiratory, but they also are more, the transmission for norovirus is 80% person to person. So it's basically hand to hand or hand to face or whatever. And so if there's not a good hand hygiene program that's going to kill it, then outbreaks are going to continue. And
it's scary to think, Neal, that you could have contaminated skin. You grab a product you have confidence in, and it's doing nothing.
Exactly. And that's what I'm trying to make sure people understand is in a particular setting, and healthcare and food service are the two most, but it's everywhere, that if you have had any contact with anybody that had norovirus, right now, the only thing that you can do is you can remove it if you wash your hands properly, which I'm sure everybody realizes isn't really done that often, unfortunately. I mean, that's why there's companies out there that teach you how to wash your hands. Companies like Soapy that teach you how to wash your hands, which is crazy to think about, that we need to be taught to wash our hands, but it is necessary. And the only way you're going to get norovirus off your hands is if you use the proper technique to get it off, because you can remove it, but you're still not going to kill it. And if you miss a little bit of it, I mean, fractions of it, you could easily go out and contaminate numerous people very easily. And washing your hands doesn't kill it unless you use water that's 140 degrees, but then you're going to be over in the ER getting your hands treated for burns. So you won't have to worry about norovirus at that point.
I'm going to just move to the moon.
Well, I don't believe that there's norovirus on the moon, so you should be safe there. But you never know. I mean, these microbes,
well,
we've been up there a couple of times.
Maybe there's some there.
What Neil Armstrong brought to the moon. So,
all joking aside, Gavin, let's go to you. You heard what Neal said. What do you think? What should we do?
Yeah, it's so important that I support what Neal said, but also would highly recommend people read the article as well, Jeff. The point that we're trying to make, as well as ISSA being a trade association and working with ISSA members like Neal, is how do we sell prevention? How do we convince there is a very easy intervention? There's a very easy process to prevent everyone from getting sick. And so we go back and look at this throughout the lens of, does this get taught in schools, K to 12? Are we teaching this in our churches? Do we see this on the TV? No, we don't. And Neal's absolutely right. It's not hard. I know you're going to the moon, Jeff. That's rocket science, but it's not rocket science for what we're talking about. And what we're talking about now, fundamental hand hygiene. So when you wash your hands with soap and water, and when you can't, or you don't have access to soap and water, then your second choice is to use a product in a bottle, a hand sanitizer. And what Neal is clearly stating here is not all hand sanitizers are the same, and we don't have that on the label. We don't talk about that, and we really lack that education and understanding within our communities on proper basic hand hygiene, which again studies have shown, Jeff, would reduce the number of infectious diseases, or the number of times we get sick, by at least 80%.
Yeah, Kevin's 100% right. It's education and making people aware, which is what we're trying to do here, is critical. And the more people know, the more they're going to be able to potentially prevent spreading norovirus or any other viruses around as well. So, I mean, it's just knowing that you can take care of the respiratory viruses with the alcohol hand sanitizers, but just not norovirus. And you have to look elsewhere. And there are things that can see. The problem is you can't really make any direct claims for something, even though you know that they have the ability to take care of the problem. And I've been searching for answers to this problem for 35 years. We've added things to alcohol before that we knew had non-envelope viral efficacy. I mean, when I was making Alcare for Calgon Vestal before they got sold off into wherever they are now, but we added CHG, chlorhexidine gluconate, to it, and which is also kind of harsh, but it's used in surgical scrubs. But we know that it had non-envelope viral efficacy, but we were never able to commercialize it because it would have required a new drug application to go with it, which costs millions of dollars through the FDA. I tried it again years later with a silver dihydrogen citrate product, which is very good for your hands as well and doesn't have the dermal issues, but again, ran into the same problem trying to get something through the FDA, because any disinfectants that you see, surface disinfectants that you see that have alcohol in them, that have norovirus efficacy, have other products in them that will kill the norovirus, or at least break the capsid layer. They have, quats in them or a variety of others. So you won't see a just plain alcohol, even disinfectant, that can have norovirus efficacy, but it's real easy to put something in a disinfectant that's going on a surface instead of something that's going to go on your hands. And that's the difference, is you can't just put quats into the hand sanitizer to kill norovirus, because then you're going to have quats on your hands. It's a leave-on product. And you're going to have dermal issues where way worse than just what alcohol itself is causing already. So it's a conundrum, but there is hypochlorous acid. I don't know if you guys want to really talk about that much, but
well, I have a question about that. So
sure.
Hypochlorous acid, I believe you've told me before that that's effective on norovirus. True?
There's testing that proves that it has norovirus efficacy. That's how you have to say it, so the FDA doesn't get mad at me.
Exactly. And I could tell some hesitation earlier. You were being very careful about what you said, because you can't make claims that will get the attention of the authorities, you could say. But the point of the chemistry, it has to be packaged in a way that's used by consumers according to regulations.
Correct.
And in Europe, it's different than the US, correct?
Exactly. And that's the thing is, hypochlorous acid is approved as a hand sanitizer in Europe. There seems like they're always ahead of us for some reason. And so even though, I don't know how people are educated in Europe about the difference between alcohol hand sanitizers and hypochlorous hand sanitizers, because over there you can call them that. And even in Europe, you're going to have the same problems. If people don't know the difference, if they don't know that the alcohol hand sanitizers don't kill norovirus and switch to the hypochlorous ones, which are antiviral. I mean, it's right on the label but then they're surface and skin. So that is, the thing is they only have one agency. They don't have to go from EPA to FDA and back and forth between disinfectant and hand cleansing or sanitization. And so it's much more efficient that way instead of having two agencies. But I'm not.
Hey, maybe I'm not going to go to the moon. Maybe I'm going to Europe.
Actually, and I do know that some of them are specifically made for hands. And there's the thing with hypochlorous acid is there's all different kinds. I mean, you've got some that are higher points ppms, parts per million, that are really more intended for surface cleaning or disinfection, and some that are actually made for wound care, specifically for wound care. And you'll get a company called Vosh from Ergo. They're one of the leading hypochlorous wound cleansers, but they're not a hand sanitizer. They don't market it that way. Now, it probably would work similar, and it is approved for dermal. And that's the thing, that's the difference you have to look for if you are going to use a hypochlorous acid product. You need to find one that's specifically for dermal, for skincare. And, I mean, even if you look at, I actually quoted in the article a dermatologist from the Cleveland Clinic who worked with hypochlorous acid, and she actually came out and said, make sure you find one intended for skin. And that means the pH needs to be somewhere around 7, so between 6.5 and 7.5. You don't want too high or too low. And you also should look for one that's got FDA cleared, because there is a way for the FDA to have what's called a 510K, where it's become a medical device, and then the FDA clears it. And I do know that there is one that's antimicrobial, and it has that in the designation, and it's SHOCL, it's stabilized hypochlorous acid, and it's got the 510K, the FDA clearance, and the pH. And I do know that it has been tested for norovirus efficacy at a GLP independent laboratory, and it passed the testing for norovirus. I'm not making any claims, but
we have plenty of acronyms going around here, though. That's for sure.
Well, that's, the only way to really make sure is to make sure that at the very least that, if it's got a 510K, they had to do all of the testing, thermal sensitivity, cytotoxicity, things like that, so that that it's okay to use on skin. And the wound cleansers did all that as well, but they're not marketing their product as antimicrobial hand cleansers. And so therefore, there needs to be something in the middle between the ones that are really more for disinfecting, and some of them do a really good job of disinfecting, and the ones that are intended for wound care. And so that's why I'm just kind of letting people know that if they want to look for something that has been tested for norovirus efficacy and is cleared for skin by the FDA with the 510K, then that it is out there. And if they want to look for it, then that might be a good idea, but that's up. Everybody needs to do their own. The other thing is hand washing instruction needs to be improved immensely as well. I mean, hand washing has got to be still the number one thing for hand hygiene. Everybody should be washing their hands as often as possible and doing the best job that they can. And then if they're going to be in a setting where there's norovirus transmission, they can look for something that has been tested for norovirus efficacy.
So Neal is not making claims. He's offering thoughts, and everyone should do their research, protect themselves.
Yes.
Gavin, let's wrap up with you. What do you think about this conversation?
It's so important, Jeff, that we work towards solutions that are science-based, evidence-based, and that requires education and training, but also awareness. So, again, when we look at those labels of both just a cleaning products, but also hand sanitizers, we're not seeing any visual cues on the effectiveness of those hand sanitizers across the spectrum of the germs that can cause infectious diseases. So again, when we're moving forward down the same pathway of trying to ensure that everyone who is an ISSA member, listens to our webinars and our talks, knows how things work based on science and evidence. And as Neal has clearly outlined, there is science out there. There really is. But there's one last thing we haven't covered, Jeff. We're three guys talking about hand hygiene. Neal mentioned there's some harsher chemicals out there. We haven't talked about hand care and just how much I learned throughout the COVID-19 pandemic about hand lotion from all who are, oh, Gavin, you don't use, what type of hand lotion do you use to keep your hands from cracking and splitting and bleeding when I was using so much soap and water and hand sanitizer? So again, that's another topic for us to talk to next time, Jeff, but really important. Hand sanitizers work depending on the active ingredient and depending on the infectious disease germ that we're actually trying to control.
I appreciate your time today, gentlemen. I'm going to go wash my hands. And Neal, I'm going to call you on the phone and find out what lotion I should use afterwards.
Sure thing. Be happy to help you out.